A century after she sank, some stunning new images of Titanic on the ocean floor. Welcome back to Halifax. The final hours of that doomed ship unfolded not far from here. And that meant this city, the closest major seaport, played a key role in the aftermath. It was exactly 100 years ago today that RMS Titanic left Southampton. The first stop was Cherbourg to pick up more passengers. En route to Ireland, the captain tested the ship's turning. Finally, at Queenstown, the anchor was raised for the last time and Titanic sailed for New York. For 3 days, the weather was clear and the water was calm. But on the night of April 14th, Titanic steamed into a field of icebergs and hit one. Shortly thereafter, the ship and 1,500 souls were lost. Her last reported position was 700 nautical miles east of Halifax. So what happens when disaster arrives at your door? In April 1912, that was the story of Halifax. Just 3 hours after hitting an iceberg, the Titanic goes down in the frigid North Atlantic. It's the end of a maritime dream, and for the people of Halifax, the beginning of a grim chapter. But at first, the news isn't so bad. Initial telegrams state that the Titanic is afloat, being towed to Halifax. The ship's owners at the White Star Line even make plans to transport passengers to New York. It's a period of confusion and perhaps denial that John Boileau has written about.
Initially, there wasn't going to be a recovery operation mounted because the custom at the time was if bodies were found at sea from a shipwreck, they were buried by passing ships. If they floated ashore, they were picked up and buried by local communities. In this case, however, there were a number of wealthy Americans on board, and their relatives were clamoring for their bodies to be recovered.
A full 2 days after the Titanic sunk, the first boat was dispatched from Halifax, the Mackie Bennett. This wasn't a rescue operation. Her decks were loaded with coffins, ice, and embalming fluid. The ship's crew were rugged men used to laying cable in the North Atlantic. But on this voyage, they were joined by 2 undertakers and a minister.
The bodies, which had their life jackets on, as a result, they were all floating almost as if they were standing in the water with the heads and faces out of the water. And the captain remarked that it looked like as much as a flock of seagulls, these white life jackets on the ocean.
In total, 4 Halifax ships were a part of the recovery operation. Very quickly, bodies were piled up on the decks. Embalming fluid ran low. So the minister performed hasty memorials, burying 138 at sea.
No matter where they turned, there would be evidence of the disaster in the form of bodies, waiting to be embalmed, being embalmed, waiting to be sewn into shrouds. Others put in the hold on ice because there weren't enough coffins. So it would have been a very unsettling and upsetting task.
2 weeks after the sinking, the Mackie Bennett returned to Halifax with what newspapers called its cargo of death. Flags in the port city flew at half-mast, and as she entered the harbor, church bells tolled. Dock workers bowed their heads. Lines of hearses waited to transport bodies to a makeshift mortuary. The only space available, a local curling club. And the bleak work began, identifying the passengers. Many of the victims were a mystery. No identification, just a jacket, ring, or locket that told only part of their story. Halifax became a graveyard with up to 20 funerals a day in churches throughout the city. In June, nearly 2 months after the sinking, the people of Halifax buried the last of Titanic's dead with dozens of others in this cemetery. Today, 150 Titanic passengers have their final resting place here, many memorialized with a name. Some still a mystery after 100 years of remembering.